Krystal and Kyle on the Krystal Kyle and Friends podcast, addressing Joe Rogan's latest controversial comments, this time about paternity leave. If you guys remember Pete Buttigieg, who, inspired this pretty big controversy, pretty big debate about paternity leave, because it was revealed that he's been on paternity leave for a couple months as the, transportation secretary. Of course, we have this big supply chain crisis. So needless to say, a lot of people, especially on the right, were pointing fingers, calling him out, saying, this is disgraceful. Where have you been? But it created a wider discussion about the subject matter, and Joe Rogan himself, of the Joe Rogan Experience, did weigh in. And needless to say, his comments were controversial. Krystal Kyle here addressed those comments. Again, I thought this was very interesting, especially because Kyle and Krystal, being as friendly as they are on a personal and professional level with Joe Rogan, it's rare that you do see them call Joe out or disagree with him publicly. So I was interested to see the tone they were going to strike in this clip.
An interesting thing that I'd like to talk to you about, Krystal, and get your feelings on this. So,
okay.
Joe Rogan is, in my opinion, he's a genuinely decent person. He's a nice guy. He's, at this point, probably the only person in this industry who I would consider a friend. Let's see. Cenk Uygur hates my guts because of my feelings on the Jimmy Dore situation. Anna Kasparian hates my guts because of the feelings on the Jimmy Dore situation. Jimmy Dore hates my guts because of my feelings on that same situation. So let's just say I'm a lonely man. And Joe Rogan is actually one.
Before we go any further, I did just want to say that if Cenk, Anna, and Jimmy are all still hung up about Kyle for giving his honest opinion on that situation, which unfolded, months ago now, then that's pretty petty and ridiculous, in my opinion. Completely petty.
Yeah, and he can also join the fucking club in the lonely leftist community. It's not like Gavin and I haven't pissed off fucking everybody in this world too. So hey, you ever want to come on the Vanguard, Kyle, you're welcome. We can shoot the shit.
One of the few who has been, it's been very, just like a normal guy who he's easy to talk to.
Yeah.
And I think, before we get into specific comments here, which I have disagreements with,
right,
pretty strong disagreements, I do think he generally gets a bad rap on the left. And I know that you did a monologue about this a while ago, because what happens is anytime Joe Rogan says left-wing stuff, it's never news. Nobody talks about it. This is a guy who's in favor of a living wage, $15 minimum wage. This is a guy who's in favor of universal health care. Mm-hmm. This is a guy who's in favor of ending the wars. And you go down the policy list, and he's correct on all those issues, but it never makes news when he says it. It only seems to make news when he says conservative things, because then the conservatives love him for it and they give him endless praise, and then the lefties attack him. Right. And so you get this skewed picture that he's on the right. Now, I will say it's not the case that, with Joe, he never talks about the left things, because he does. It's just not covered. Mm-hmm. Because there are some people who like to say, oh, I'm on the left, but 100% of the time that they talk, they're just saying conservative things. And those people are like charlatans and frauds, and they found a niche and they're exploiting that. But Joe is definitely not that, because he talks about his left-wing positions, just nobody seems to care or write articles about it when he does, and nobody highlights it when he does.
He just completely owned Dave Rubin on Rubin's ridiculous fantasy libertarian views around housing regulation.
Obliterated Dave Rubin. I mean, in a legendary fashion. That clip casually was amazing.
Yeah.
Wait, I got more. Obliterated Candace Owens.
Yeah.
In a way that was legendary. I got more. Obliterated Steven Crowder in a way that was legendary.
I don't even know about that one.
See, that's what I'm saying. So people, it's a little frustrating, because you get the sense that he's this guy that he's not.
That he's doctrinaire right-wing, when the reality is he has views that are across the spectrum. He's heterodox. I mean, you just pointed out some of the things that are definitely lefty. I mean, the guy said he was going to vote for Bernie Sanders, for God's sake. So he's definitely not some, the right-wing caricature that the media makes him out as. And I've always thought it was foolish from a lefty perspective, as someone who wants to see these values broadly shared, that you wouldn't. The right has been very savvy in claiming him as their own. Why wouldn't you do that when he agrees with you on so much? And there was an interesting moment, the podcast recently that got so much attention with Sanjay Gupta, where they talked about the horse deworming thing and whatever. And Joe was completely 100% right about the way that CNN intentionally mischaracterized that. But towards the end, they got into a conversation about Joe's ideology. And Joe said, I'm on the left. And Sanjay was kind of floored by that he would even like...
Because he bought the caricature.
Because he bought the caricature. All he knew was the media's representation of Joe, which is wildly skewed from what his actual views are. So that's all pretext for this conversation.
Right. And there's also a reason why I wanted to talk about this too, because in my experience, Joe is genuinely open-minded. And if you explain something and it's convincing, he'll be like, didn't think of it that way. I changed my mind.
Yes.
So anyway,
one of his...
And that is true. It's seemingly, if you are able to convincingly make a case for your opinion on the Joe Rogan experience, at least from what I've seen, he usually does end up kind of nodding along with it. Again, it takes someone as fucking stupid as Dave Rubin or Candace Owens for him to actually be like, I see, the fallacy in your logic. Let me point that out and kind of go after you a little bit. But yeah, if you're like even remotely intelligent and make your case to Joe Rogan on his show, there's a good chance he's just going to nod along and go like, yeah, I totally agree with that.
Obvious that he's pretty wishy-washy in his views and that he can be swayed a lot. And yes, that is good for when left-wingers are on there because he can convince them of like, Eddie Wong convinced him of UBI one time in an argument. And he was like, people are going to be masturbating in the streets if you give them money. And Eddie Wong was like, you're fucking crazy. Like people will spend this money smart. Like they just need like extra income. And he was like, oh, okay, I get that. You know what I mean? But then the same time, it'll, there'll be like another cringy argument where, of right wingers on there, able to convince him of, some austerity measure or whatever. But anyway,
more likable traits for sure.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah.
So he was talking to Bridget Fetisi here, and they were talking about Pete Buttigieg and the paternity leave that he was taking. Now, you're not going to see that in this clip. I wanted the longer clip, but we were having issues with it. I only was able to get the shorter clip where he's talking about this. So we'll get into that more afterwards. The conversation started with Pete Buttigieg, and then now we get to the broader topic of paid paternity leave, and here's what happens.
I'm questioning who do you believe should pay for something like that?
I don't know, but if I was an employer and I had a guy who worked for me, who wanted to take 3 months off because his wife gave birth, I'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about, Mike?
Even to support his wife?
Give birth? To support his wife, I pay him for free. Do you understand that this is kind of most people, when this happens, if they make enough money, the wife will not work and the father will work.
Right.
And then the wife takes care of the child. And this is normal.
Yeah.
And then the dad provides support when he comes home. If you're saying that the man and the woman should both get like 3 months off, this is a new thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
Isn't
it's
it?
not new in Europe, but
We're not in Europe. This is better. This is America.
First of all, by what metric is America better than Europe? What the fuck? I would consider, Europe getting paid family leave, paid paternal leave to be a, clear example of them being better. Also, go to Europe, see a lot more small businesses, way less fucking corporations. It's not just a sea of goddamn Walmarts and, Casey's and every other corporation under the sun. It's actually, a thriving small business environment. You could say that the American dream is actually far more alive in parts of Europe than it is here in America. Also, we're the most incarcerated country in the world. What do you mean America is better? This is so dumb.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. And also just, again, that whole clip is just exactly what I was talking about a second ago. This is a total, this dude's just so far removed from what it's like to be an average working person. He's like, oh, well, the dad's just gonna, go to work and then the mom will stay home and, everything will be fine. And if you make enough money, this just all works out for you. He literally said, if you make enough money, that's what he said. Because he's like, oh yeah, if you just make enough money, it'll all work out. Like, what are you talking about, bro? Look, one, yes, you should be able to bond with your child during its most formative years at home. And yeah, you can afford to pay them to. And yeah, it's a good thing. And it will make your child grow and develop better. And they will be more attached to you as the father. And you won't offload your child's development onto the mother, which happens all the time in America. Happens all the time in America. What would be a new thing is giving the people in this country the ability to actually enjoy what should be a fundamental right of parents, which is bonding with their child after its birth in an intense, real way. Like, that's extremely important. That emotional connection that you establish with your parents during infancy, like, people don't even realize, like, your first 6 years, 7 years on this planet are extremely important, but those first months of establishing physical contact, feeling loved, warmed, a part of your family unit. These things have long lasting effects on somebody's mental health, their ability to form relationships. All of these things really matter. And he just comes at this from the most like elitist dog shit perspective. And I don't know. It just shows how out of touch everybody who has $100 million is.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, you're absolutely right that those couple months after your child is born, those should be some of the most important months of your entire life. Like having a child is and should be one of the most important moments of any person's life. And for someone like Joe Rogan to suggest that, oh no, it's more important for you to, shuffle your ass back to work, keep slaving away so that you can make a couple extra dollars for your boss, instead of spending that time with your kid, that's insane. Are you fucking kidding me? And I would imagine that Joe Rogan is one of these people that pretends to be pro-family and, the family is the backbone of this country and all that kind of shit. But then you're going to turn around and say that, slaving your ass off for some corporation that you hate doing is more important than the, first couple of months of spending time with your kid. Like, what the fuck kind of logic is that? So
then the wife takes care of the child. And this is normal.
Yeah.
And then the dad provides support when he comes home. If you're saying that the man and the woman should both get like 3 months off, this is a new thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
Isn't
it's
it?
not new in Europe, but
We're not in Europe. This is better. This is America.
Yeah, this is America. We don't get anything nice here.
Okay, so before we get to the specific comments there, the thing that started the conversation was Pete Buttigieg. Now, Pete Buttigieg is the Secretary of Transportation. He's taken off, how long has it been now?
3 months, I think.
He's taken off 3 months. When he's Secretary of Transportation and we have a supply chain crisis and you got like 1,000 ships that are lined up in the port of LA. Mm-hmm. And so the point that people are making, and again, I'm not sure how directly involved the Secretary of Transportation would be with this issue, but the claim seems to be that, oh yes, he's actually the one who's like mostly in charge.
Yeah.
And so he needs to be there.
Right. I mean, ultimately, I did a monologue on this on Breaking Points, and ultimately where I came down is like, let's stop pretending that Pete Buttigieg would have done anything about a supply chain crisis. Like,
okay.
I mean, it sort of exposes how irrelevant he is to the whole process. But if you stipulated that he was a critical link and he is the reason why the supply chain has broken down and not enough has been done about it, and that this is impacting millions of Americans, and you stepped up for this job where you have a responsibility always, of course, to yourself and your family and your new babies and all of that, but you also have a responsibility to the American people that you have taken on here.
Right. So I covered this too, and my takeaway was, I think it's a reasonable criticism because let's not pretend like all jobs are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I made the joke to you when we first heard about this. I was like, I'm going to run for president, win, and then on day one be like, I'm going on paternity leave for 5 months or whatever. And I mean, it's comical, right? Because the general idea is, yes, there's some positions, some jobs that are so important that it's almost, you don't even need to say it. It's kind of understood that your nose better be the grindstone and you better be, working extra hard, and you don't really get the same sort of standard things that people with regular jobs would get.
And to this point, I do kind of agree. Yeah, if you're Pete Buttigieg, a public servant making hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer money, then yeah, maybe you should only take a couple weeks of paternity leave rather than 2 months, specifically when we're in this, crisis involving the very field which you're supposed to be the head of. So yeah, I do agree with that point. But when it came to Joe Rogan's comments, he was saying, if I was a business owner, if I was an employer, this is how I would respond. This is how I would treat my employees when they asked for paternity leave. He wasn't saying if I was, the president and my transportation secretary was trying to take paternity leave. He was just saying in a regular business, employment environment that would be his response. So yeah, I agree more with the Pete Buttigieg element, less so with the average worker.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is that I think Krystal was right on the money. Like, let's not pretend that Pete Buttigieg was capable of fixing fucking anything, and that should be the real conversation. One, he was dramatically underqualified for this position. He was not a good pick. It was clearly payback for dropping out of the race when Joe wanted him to. He, it was like a kickback or whatever from the campaign. So that's first and foremost. The fact that there's no heat on Joe Biden for the supply chain is also fucking insane, because he's the president of the United States and he should be figuring it the fuck out. He should be the one calling Pete Buttigieg and saying, get the fuck back to work if there's something that needs to be done. Right? Because again, yes, 100%. If you're the somebody that's in a critical position in the United States, you might need to take a phone call, 4 weeks into your paternity leave and negotiate some things, come back to the office for a few days. Like, I believe in a robust paternity leave, and I don't even have a problem with 12 weeks. What I have a problem with is the fact that we don't have 12 weeks for our fucking people mandated. Why the fuck are we paying for that as taxpayers? That's my beef, right? I think this is the absurdity of this is that we can't just use this as a rallying cry for why we need across the board, paternity leave, because it is 100% true that Pete Buttigieg is fucking up his job royally, but he would be doing that if he was in his office every single day. Like, he's just not going to be good at it. And he's, it's the machine's going to keep moving, and it's, neoliberalism persisting. Right. But we should all be uniting as a left in saying what is really a problem here is that 12 weeks is unacceptable for our representatives if it's unacceptable for us, right? Like, what the fuck? Like, you don't get to be treated like royalty in this country. You're a public servant. And we've gotten that, lost apparently, right? Like, we shouldn't be giving anything to our representatives or people who are serving the, executive administration, things that we don't mandate for all of the people. And if you look at how gutted the infrastructure bill of anything positive that would be, used as an incentive for workers or, the elderly or anything like that, it gets completely gutted. We should be having that kind of a conversation right now. And I just think this is all in the weeds. Like, let's dunk on Pete Buttigieg because we hated him from the primary, that we're missing the actual issue here, which is that every American father or mother should have access to a robust paternity leave for the reasons we laid out earlier in this podcast. And the fact that they don't is the problem. And if you juxtapose the robust benefits package that comes with a role like Pete Buttigieg's and the austerity and the just disdain for the working class that is represented in these infrastructure negotiations that we've seen, you would realize that it doesn't add up, and that would be a good way to convince people to reject this bill, kill this bill, as we've been calling for. But instead, I just feel like this has become a weird dunking contest, and it's like, oh, do you support parental leave, or do you think Pete Buttigieg is fucking up? And it's like, both are true.
Would you disagree with that position? That, like, there's some jobs that are so important that it's like, don't be silly and just be MIA?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're assuming that the Secretary of Transportation is actually like a key linchpin in all of this, I just think it's very narrow to only recognize the responsibility that, of course, you have to your family, but not recognize any other responsibilities that you may have. And I think there is a little bit of a liberal inclination in that regard, where everything is just about like the individual and self-care. And you see this in our politics, where voters are meant to be vessels of fulfilling the ambitions of the politician rather than the politician serving the people. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to say, take a little bit of time off, but this is really serious and things are going really poorly right now. And we're in the middle of a crisis. It happens to be that the Department of Transportation randomly is suddenly this critical, agency in the federal government. Maybe get back to work and deal with that. Now, all that being said, I think Pete Buttigieg is probably totally irrelevant to the supply chain crisis, whether he's there or not. But the intellectual question is an interesting one.
Yeah. And so, but when I first saw the Pete Buttigieg thing, my reaction was that this is actually terrible for paid leave, paid family leave, paid paternity leave.
That's a great
period, point. Because now it's going to be viewed as this trivial, selfish, narcissistic thing that people exploit, as opposed to what it really is, which is absolutely crucial and vital and important and something that we're lagging behind the rest of the world on. So before you jump in, I just want to show the one of the charts first, guys. Throw this up there. So you can see here, the United States, dead last.
But this is America. We're better than Europe.
0 days when it comes to government mandated paid leave for new parents. Now that's both maternity leave, paternity leave, family leave in general. Like you mentioned, if there's like a sick parent or something like that, and you need to take.
Also, I love how Joe Rogan loves to talk about freedom all the time, and like especially around COVID, like you're taking away my freedoms and stuff. But then when someone has a literal child, he's like, get back to work. You don't have the freedom to spend time with your newborn child. You know, go slave away at this job you hate for fucking peanuts.
Of them. So we have 0 days. Now, look at the rest of that list. You have Estonia with 86 weeks. Then you have Bulgaria underneath them, Hungary underneath them, Japan underneath them. And you go down the list, like Norway is pretty high up there. Germany's up there. So this is something that I think he misunderstands, because he even mentions like you paying for it as the employer. No, in most of those countries, the government picks up the tab. It's not the employer. That's the whole point of having government mandated
with taxes
paid
from
family
the
leave,
employers.
whether it's maternity leave, paternity leave, or what have you. Because I mean, it's generally understood, especially if you're a smaller business. You know, you probably can't foot that bill.
And this is actually an interesting point that Kyle raises that needs to be stressed more by the left in general. It's like a lot of these policies, whether it's universal health care or paid family leave, they actually help out business owners. They help out small businesses in particular by taking the burden off of them to provide their workforce with healthcare, for example. That's a massive expense for your average small business, trying to provide their workers with decent healthcare and benefits, because it's on them. In the system that we're fighting for, with a robust social safety net, with a robust welfare state, that actually takes that burden off of the business, off of the small business owners. So even if you want to come at this from a more right-wing perspective, then you could still support paid family leave, universal health care, and other robust welfare, implementations, because again, it actually takes that burden off of small businesses and small business owners.
Yeah, and Joe Rogan is not a small business, right? Like, this dude is massively profitable. He can afford to pay his taxes when they go up. Like, it's one of those things, right? Yes, businesses will pay more in taxes, but they will not be responsible for providing this to the people, right? And the larger corporations will pay a higher tax rate under a socialist system, just like we've seen work and be successful in countless other countries that are massively smaller than us. But just to harp on that point once more, this idea that yes, the lack of these things does hurt small businesses, right? Because you'll notice in small businesses, oftentimes they don't have full-time employment, because after the Obamacare negotiations, it became mandated that any full-time employee had to be provided with a healthcare option from their employer. So what did every small business do, along with like massive amounts of large businesses? They just reduced everybody's hours to 28 hours a week and said, nobody's getting more hours than this. We're not supplying you with health care. This is a problem for small businesses specifically, because you can't, you're not going to be able to find, workers that, are full-time, that, all working all day, if you can't afford to pay people health care, right? And obviously that is a problem for small business. And as leftists, we can, understand that and say, yes, companies like Amazon, which have put our small businesses out of work, basically, and or out of business, to use the term business over a lot, this argument, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like, we can.
Well, yeah, and it also actually gives the big corporations like Amazon a massive advantage over the small businesses. It really makes it an unlevel playing field, because obviously corporations like Amazon, they can afford to pay their workers benefits, even though they usually don't give them adequate benefits. But it leaves the small businesses, which oftentimes genuinely are struggling to get by, it leaves them in the lurch, them having to, try to compete with what the massive corporations and businesses are able to afford, because again, they're not even fucking taxed. Of course, they have the money on hand to pay their workers benefits.
Yeah, exactly. And they've undercut everybody else for so long that their competition has disappeared. So now they can jack up the prices.
Backlash to this policy,
right,
when they portray themselves as the pro-family people.
Yeah, so that was part of what I wanted to say too. It's interesting on that list, the second or third country up there is Hungary, which is like, there's this sort of right-wing obsession with Hungary and with the policies that are coming out of Hungary, and partly because they're like intensely focused on the family. Some of their very xenophobic policies have forced an out-migration, and so they're doing all sorts of things to try to encourage their population to have kids and to build families and whatever. But the and this again is not directed at Joe, it's directed at people in general on the right who are big critics of this. It doesn't really fit with the whole idea of like, family is actually important as a building block and kids need their parents. And like, that's actually something that the right has tried to champion with their rhetoric. And then when it comes down to these types of policies, not just with, paid family leave, which, by the way, I'm just talking about right-wing politicians, because if you poll the country is overwhelmingly on board with paid family leave. But when it comes down to the policies, suddenly it's like, no, get your ass back to work. Not just here, but also with the sort of work requirements on any sort of social safety net, where then the value becomes it's better for mom or dad to be away at work, even if they have kids at home that could benefit from their nurture. So look, I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. It is good for babies to have their parents around, especially in their very early days. It's good for dads to have the time to be able to bond with baby when baby is new to the world. And it's really good.
I like how she's having to explain this, by the way. Like, it's actually a good thing for you to be there in the formative first 3 months of your child's existence instead of working your ass off at a job that you hate that will depress you and will ultimately lead to you killing yourself and leaving your child fatherless.